Hello and welcome to State Line. I'm Ian Henschke. Today, a group of Western Suburbs residents lost their bid in the Supreme Court to stop housing on the Cheltenham Racecourse. They wanted the rezoning of the area to allow housing ruled invalid. That rezoning was one of the key points in the long-running battle over the sale of Cheltenham. 891 ABC Radio's David Bevan has been covering the story from the beginning and prepared this special report.
Well, you've got to know when you've had a win. I mean, this is a very good outcome for the local community.
At the 2002 state election, Labor made it quite clear, and Jay Weatherall in particular made it clear, that only Labor would save the open space that is Cheltenham Park.
For more than 100 years, people have been coming to Cheltenham Racecourse, the working man's track, hoping to back a sure thing. But since the 70s, others have thought there was a better way to win at Cheltenham: sell the land. In 2002, the ALP's Jay Weatherall won the seat after campaigning to save the racecourse. But about 18 months later, Weatherall and the owner of the neighbouring Actil site and the SAJC were discussing the possibilities of a sale.
They were fairly clandestine meetings because obviously we didn't want to expose the fact that we were meeting with developers, because ultimately the South Australian Jockey Club was committed to going to tender and not dealing with an individual party.
What's somebody doing who campaigned to keep it free from development doing facilitating a meeting between a developer and a jockey club?
Well, we could see what was happening, and the SAJC said they no longer wanted to race racehorses at the Cheltenham Racecourse.
The residents, like myself, would have had no inkling of that whatsoever.
No idea that he was meeting with the jockey club and the developer?
No.
I told them exactly what I was doing in terms of advocating for a position that maximised the benefits out of this. And of course that meant meeting with anyone that was in a position to do that.
Jay Weatherall says he made it clear to everyone that he personally remained opposed to the sale, and if the jockey club insisted on selling, they'd better get community support behind them. In September 2004, at a controversial meeting, the sale plans were endorsed by jockey club members. The sale process was off and running.
Don't sell Cheltenham.
Jay Weatherall set up a residents group. By now he believed they had to get the best compromise out of the club. But other residents were determined to maintain the battle to keep it as open space.
People in Woodville had confidence in Jay Weatherall's position, that Labor in government and with all those things like proclamation and trust property, that it would be assured to be kept as open space.
Steve Plebita says the club would have sold the course to the government.
Absolutely. David, we would have been prepared to sell it to you if you wanted to buy it.
The government, though, wasn't prepared to buy it. But in April 2005, the Premier and senior ministers met the residents group. Notes the residents made record Infrastructure Minister Patrick Conlon warning that if Labor was not in government, it would be difficult to protect the site. The Premier said the government didn't have a majority in either house, so it couldn't legislate to protect Cheltenham. And even if it refused to rezone the land for housing, a future Liberal government would. The issue of rezoning had become crucial. Steve Plebita says if the government didn't rezone the course for housing, its sale wouldn't result in sufficient profit. The SAJC engaged the services of lobbyist and former Labor Senator Nick Bolkus to assist them to achieve that.
We also had to make sure that there was someone who was good enough to be able to push our cause on a daily basis or be available to us when required, and that was Nick Bolkus.
The Jockey Club promised to pay him $137,000 for his lobbying services upon necessary government approvals being granted. The residents had long known they needed something other than racing if Cheltenham was to stay as open space, and they found it in water.
It's the only significant open space in the western suburbs, but it's also subject to serious flooding. The stormwater that comes down Torrens Road and comes down the Port Road finishes up in that area.
People had been talking about capturing stormwater at the track for years. In a drought-stricken state, they believed they'd found a winner. At the same time as Nick Bolkus was working for the Jockey Club, he was running the state government's new Stormwater Committee, a group set up to manage stormwater projects across the city. He was appointed as the committee's chairman by longtime friend and factional ally Patrick Conlon. Mr Bolkus has denied any conflict of interest and told ABC News in 2008 that for the first 20 months, Cheltenham didn't come up. When it did, he left the room and allowed the committee to deliberate in accordance with the rules. Mr Conlon says Nick Bolkus demonstrated during his chairmanship that he was scrupulous in managing any conflict of interest.
Cheltenham Racecourse doesn't have an issue on stormwater management at present.
Well, there might be some people who would argue that Cheltenham Racecourse would be a key piece of infrastructure in the management of stormwater.
Well, they may, but it's not been suggested to me.
In October 2006, the Land Management Corporation, which answers to Patrick Conlon, had the results of 3 months of public consultation. That report showed most people wanted Cheltenham kept as open space, and a key reason was the opportunity to use the site for innovative, large-scale stormwater recovery and reuse. The local council had discussed asking the state and federal governments for more money to buy the land so that it could be used to catch water. And in November 2006, the Friends of Gulf St Vincent wrote to Mr Conlon suggesting the land could be used as a potential water factory. Last month on 891 Mornings, we asked Mr Conlon about these issues.
Well, actually, David, I'm not going to go and debate what was said then, but I'll tell you that it's us that actually have get back to the start. Private sector land owned by a racing company. They wanted to sell it and wanted it rezoned. It was their decision to sell. They didn't want to run racing. We imposed on them the biggest open space obligation that's ever been imposed on anything, including an obligation to create wetlands. So, but can I say, I've heard so much nonsense about this development. We have imposed the greatest obligation on open space, which includes wetlands, and it used to be a racecourse. It's a significant net improvement in open space and in wetlands.
I've never been interested in walking down both sides of the street. I've been interested in seeing what we could do to maximise the benefits for the community at every stage. And that involves sometimes making judgments about what is likely to happen in the future. There is no point, and it's no assistance to the community, to put your head in the sand and say, let's just oppose this and it might go away. This wasn't going away. This piece of land was always going to be a prime opportunity to develop.
We need to admire people that whilst they may make a decision, circumstances do change where they have to go back to that decision, reassess it, and if there needs to be a change in the process and their thoughts and their decision-making, well, I commend them for doing that.
Minister Conlon argues residents, having failed to retain racing, are clinging to stormwater to justify keeping Cheltenham as open space. The residents' group argue it's Labor that switched horses, from promising to fight to keep the land free of development to now clearing the way for housing on 65% of it. The land has now been bought by A.V. Jennings and Urban Pacific. The land has been rezoned.
I will defend the position at Cheltenham against any criticism that it should have been left as some locked-up racecourse. It is a much better outcome for the community.
We do feel let down by the Mike Rann and Conlon and Jay Weatherall.
What they've done is broken a promise.